All right, folks, welcome to another edition of Neptune Sunday. Special edition here. We're going to be chatting about the 15th anniversary of In My Mind, Pharrell's solo album that came out in 2006. First off, before we get started in that conversation, we got to give them a shout out. As hopefully you guys saw earlier this week, they were listed on Billboard's best producers of the 21st century at the number 2 spot out of 50, which is great. And people are giving them the default of being the best hip hop producers of the 21st century. So kudos to Pharrell and Chad. Obviously, huge impact on us, on our lives and inspirations and why we're doing this podcast. But yeah, I think they definitely deserve it. I mean, I feel like, no disrespect to the guy that got number 1, but I'd never heard of him. But apparently he's done some great songs with Britney and Ariana Grande and Taylor Swift, but number 2 out of 50 in a whole century ain't bad. So salute to the Neptunes.
Not at all. That's amazing. I'm actually surprised. I was kind of surprised that like somebody like Tim didn't get higher than them, but I'm obviously so happy to hear that they got the number 2 spot.
Yeah, I mean, a list like that where you got with them at 2 and Tim at 3 and Mike Will made it at 5, and I mean even The Dream at 4, like that's having this one guy Max Martin be number 1 and then having basically back to back hip hop and R&B artists, producers after that. It's kind of a big deal for the culture.
Yeah.
Kanye at 6 and then Just Blaze at 7. So like that's huge.
I just want to say I have a very varied musical taste. I have no idea who this guy in the top spot is. So like, let's pretend that doesn't exist.
Yeah, we're all about showing love here. We won't continue to talk about how much we don't know who this guy is. It's a big deal. This is no disrespect to him. It's like that Palmer meme. I don't know this man.
I'm gonna step my game up. We're gonna learn about him, but we're gonna focus on the Neptunes as we do on Neptune Sunday.
All right, cool. So we're getting into this is a special episode, like I said, 15th anniversary today. When you're hearing this episode, hopefully it's the Sunday you're listening to it right away. 15 years since the In My Mind album came out. So obviously it's a big deal. At the time, it was highly anticipated solo album from Pharrell. So, Bo, paint us the picture of your life in July 2006. What a time.
What a time to be alive. I was still in college, creeping on the College Park campus. I was a young choreographer. I had just joined a hip hop dance team and I was rising up in the ranks. I eventually became one of the directors. And to my recollection, I just, I had this love for the Neptunes, had this love for her. I was really excited when I heard this album was coming out and hearing that he was doing something separate from Chad. And I felt like a lot of the themes he covered on the album spoke directly to me and not necessarily to, hip hop culture at large can kind of zero in having money, having fame. And while I think for me, he touched on that, songs like Best Friend, where he talked about his grandmother, songs like Our Father, where he talked about his faith, those were the things that stuck with me over the years. And also Baby Vogue was, just coming into her sexuality. And so songs like Take It Off were a fun, sexy way to explore this new part of the world that was opening up for me.
Yes, I think that's part of what the coming of age for us, specifically being a year apart, like not even a year apart, and how a lot of the songs that we'll go over on this podcast will speak to moments in life where we are actually growing up.
Yeah.
2006, the summertime, I was back in Richmond on summer break from Hampton, probably working at Macy's in the receiving department, slaving away back there, sweating, unloading the truck. And then on the weekends, just being super ratchet with my friends, not being 21 yet, but always acting like I was all summer. Tons of great memories from that. And this album definitely is sprinkled in a lot of those memories of summer 2006. And I mean, one of the biggest thing about this album that I remember too is this is probably one of the last albums that I purchased like a physical copy of, probably since 2000, since maybe like spring 2000. Over that time period between spring 2000 and now, I've probably purchased maybe 6 albums. This was probably one of them. But that just it just speaks to how much we were fans, right? Like,
yeah.
I think when we saw the album and people started, being able to have the ability to make your own version of the cartoon character that's on the cover, like that was a big deal. That was cool, and the babes and all that kind of stuff. So you had to have a physical copy of this album because it was such a big deal for us.
Yeah.
I think the other part of it too is the hype that came with the Gangsta Grills album. I mean, that mixtape was just, it hit people like us over the head because we weren't expecting it. Because the Gangsta Grills up to that point was really mostly down south, mostly people who were like real, like actual gangsters. And then we have our guy, Skateboard P, self-proclaimed nerd, is coming on here with DJ Drama ad-libs. And I remember every song on that mixtape was just no skips. It's great features from the Clips, some stuff from Family, but it was very much like, okay, cool. If we get a whole album of this, I'll be fine. But even just the fact that we have this is like amazing to me.
Yeah. Do you have any songs that like particularly stand out in your memories from this album?
I mean, a couple, right? I think I'd say my favorite song is probably "You Can Do It Too," just for, I think, the very mellow, inspirational tone of that. And then obviously like Jamie Cullum's his I don't know what you call the technical term for that outro, but
Like
maybe it's
the bridge outro part.
Yeah.
Don't look up to the sky.
Yeah, that part of it is amazing. I think everyone loves the singles, right? Like, I think Can I Have It Like That is probably, I understand why that's the lead single. I don't love that song that much, but to follow it up with That Girl and then to follow it up with Number One is very strong.
Mm-hmm.
I really like Keep It Player, because I was really, at the time when they signed Slim Thug to Star Trek, I was like, this is a really unique person to be part of their squad, right? And he had this, bringing this Houston sound, it's completely different than what the Neptunes beats were that they were giving him. But the way he hopped on Keep It Player was very seamless and it fit very well. What else do I like? I mean, I like, so at one point, How Does It Feel was the ringtone on my T-Mobile smartphone. I don't even remember what that phone was called, but it was like one of the first smartphones, the first smartphone I ever had. What about you?
It's kind of funny that you said that you're like, Can I Have It Like That? You're not that crazy about. While we have similar musical tastes, I think I am a little bit more alternative than you. So I was huge No Doubt fan, played the Tragic Kingdom album in and out. That was actually my first cassette purchase. So when Gwen Stefani started working with Pharrell, and I think she did on a pretty consistent basis for a while, that was huge for me. And this song in particular, I want to say, was one of the first songs they did together. So that was big in my mind. I really loved Young Girl, Baby with Nelly. That was a good song. I can vividly remember, you were talking about You Can Do It Too. I can vividly remember I was working at just like this. I thought I was going to grad school, didn't go to grad school, was working at this job that I didn't want to be at. And I was in the parking lot walking to work, listening to You Can Do It Too. And I felt like some sense of empowerment by this guy that I had been inspired by for so many years. And I was also really excited to hear him work with Kanye. You have two really incredible genre-changing producers become rappers working together, and you don't see them occupy the same space in hip-hop, I think, many other times up until now. I can't name you another Pharrell and Kanye song besides number one.
Yeah. I mean, that was a huge deal for me too. Kanye is my like those two guys helped shape a lot of who I was in that time period between 2002 to 2008, which is like a real high school to college and trying to figure out what life is like. But then, it was important for people like me who weren't really trying to embrace the thug motif, right? Like I can come out here in a pink polo, or I can come out here and skateboard and do whatever and be cool with that. So like I think that record was huge. And it, for I think overall the critics, there was, I think from a critic standpoint, there was mixed reviews on this album. One of the things I read said something about how they were underwhelmed by that song in particular because it was like Pharrell getting Kanye, who was upstaging him, right? Like he's like joining forces with the producer that's replacing him as the top guy, which I was like, to me, that seems like a stretch, right? Like these guys are both dope and they're like, hey, I'm doing an album. Like if I can get my guy who I respect and I, I'm a fan of him and I can get him on my first album and put it in a single, like that's great.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, I feel like generally people who had negative thoughts about this album are probably expected more than they got, right? But for people like us who are fans of Pharrell and the Neptunes, like this was exactly what we thought it was going to be. Like I'm sure there are people who thought it was going to be Clones Part 2. He's going to have a bunch of Pharrell songs. He's going to get all his famous friends to come on and they're going to make, a bunch of Pasta Cavassiers and I Just Want to Love You and, all that other stuff that people loved at the time, Ludacris song, right? Like they just thought we were going to have him and all his boys on it. And that's what Clones was, except it didn't have the Pharrell rapping as much. So like, if this is his album, it needs to be his album. And as a fan, I probably would not have liked it as much if it was, it's me and a bunch of my famous friends, because then it's not about you. It's not really your album anymore.
Right. It did feel very much like this was the person that I thought that Pharrell was. Humble P had a varying, array of interests. Like to me, this was like representative of who he was.
Right. I know Tyler's your boy. Tyler the Creator's your boy. I remember he had like so I guess that probably would have been the 10th anniversary. He made an Instagram post that I remember him seeing and like writing a long ass caption about how much he liked the album. Or do you remember what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I do. I actually remember on that post, he noted that Raspy Shit was the worst song in Pharrell's discography, which I thought was hilarious. But he talks about how inspired he was by the album and how he used to sit up in high school and just listen to it over and over, and how number one feels like MJ and that bass line on Can I Have It Like That. It's actually quite an extensive post if you can dig it up, but I think just like us, he's a super fan. He's inspired by Pharrell and he found inspiration in every note, just like we did.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, back to the criticism of it, for critics to say what they said about it and having their expectations be one thing. I think to hear or read about Pharrell having his own criticisms of it, of the album and of the Gangsta Grills mixtape, he said something about how it was the luxury raps were basically him in the moment trying to be like, Puff and be like Jay-Z. And, for us like that, I understand from him and his personal perspective, how he looks back at it. I think that quote was from like 2014 where he's, he just did Happy and he's got like his second album coming out where he feels like those are so different than where he's at now. I understand why he said that, but at the time, yeah, we love that shit. We love those luxury raps and talking about phantoms and wearing Bape, and like even if we weren't doing it, it still was, it still was a different perspective, and we appreciate it. But that's, as an artist, you got to respect his perspective of having his growth, right? Like him looking back and saying, hey, I'm not that person. I'm not, and I was really caught in the moment. I probably wouldn't do the album again.
Yeah. I hear that, but I mean, even in that, I feel like that is an encapsulation of my experience, because like I'm not the typical person that you would expect to be a big rap fan. I'm a girl and I'm I listen to rock music and all these things that like quote unquote disqualify me from where I come from. I talk a certain way, but seeing myself in Pharrell and hearing him talk like that, I was like, oh, I can enjoy this too. This is for me too. So I always appreciate that.
So as we close up this episode, one of the most underappreciated parts of this album is the remix album with the Yes Sirs, which is led by Questlove.
I forgot about that.
I actually listened to it the other day, and there's some versions that I prefer. Like, matter of fact, now that I think about it, that How Does It Feel version that I had on my as the ringtone was the Yes Sirs version.
Oh,
But I think, to me, that's part of the overall story of the album, and I think of it in three parts because of the Gangsta Grills. I think about the album itself and how it, the impact it had during that time in my life, and then I think about discovering the remix album, just like,
yeah.
and being able to fall in love with these songs again in a different version. To me, I think that that's a very underrated aspect of why this album, and why Pharrell too, as part of his career, like, was able to have such an impact, is because when you think about that, who basically had 3 albums like that? Like, you had a mixtape, and I mean, not granted, like, tons of people have mixtapes and they have their whole albums, but like, to have a mixtape that's like revolutionary because you're the first non-gangster to do a gangster mixtape. Then you have your first solo album with all these crazy features on it.
Yep.
And then you have this remix album that's got Questlove production. Like,
It just all felt so intentional.
Yes, and it's amazing. So, 15th anniversary. Shout out to Pharrell. I think this album is better than Girl, but we can have that conversation another day. But I think Girl is very solid.
I'll say I replay this album a lot more than I replay Girl, and that's all I'll say for this episode.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think Girl is just, there's a lot of
that's peak commercial P.
Right, because Happy's on it.
Yeah, it is what it is, but like, that's not the P I grew up with. So I appreciate both of them, but this one was more foundational to like my understanding and like love of music.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this album was it was important because it was his first, it was him stepping out. Whether he realizes it or not, he did this album for us, and we appreciate him for it. So thank you, P. Congrats on 15 years of In My Mind.
Thank you, P. We love you.
Catch you guys later on the flip side. Whenever another episode,
guys.
Who knows when that's going to be.
You got to stop saying that. We'll be back.
I just want to give ourselves credit for the fact that we've done 3. We're actually going to release. I don't want to give anybody any secrets, but yes.
We always got one in the chamber for y'all.
Happy to be here.
It's been fun.
Peace and love, everybody. Thank y'all for listening. Talk to y'all soon.